now listening to the Come to the Table podcast with your host, Sean McCoy, where each week he invites a guest and welcomes them to the table to discuss any and all topics. First and foremost, Christians are called to love all people, and one of the best ways to love them is to sit down, talk with them, and listen to what they have to say. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Come to the Table podcast. I'm your host, Sean McCoy, and y'all, I'm really excited about this episode in particular. A very good friend of mine who I've known pretty much half my life, somebody that I talked to when I started this podcast, not only for advice, because I respect who he is as a person, but also and from a listening standpoint, because he has that kind of ear. But as also, there was that selfish nature that I wanted to get him on the show just because I love the guy. And he's like a brother to me. But I had to be fair, or there I am saying my favorite phrase. You know, what could I bring him onto the show for other than just to bring him on, because him and I could talk about a million things. And then it hit me, and I started, kind of take that introspect. What is it about him that makes him unique? Where's an area, and also an area that's applicable to what we're talking about on a day-to-day basis, which is, where can we find these issues that we need to come to that proverbial table for and talk and learn and address and have a conversation about. And I thought what was also unique about him is that we're very good friends, very close friends, but not very similar in a lot of ways. And so that's one of the things I love about him. And so my buddy coming on is Chris Cappello. Chris, how you doing?
Hello, Dan. How are you?
And
is it Sean? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. The nicknames already start. And so the area. And so one of the things about Chris that always stood out to me, and one of the first impressions I had of him way back, and I was trying to think. So I checked on board the ship in '94. We met in the Navy, the U.S. Navy. We served years ago on the USS Rushmore. I was on there in '94, and I was trying to. Was it '95? Was when you came on?
Yeah, April of '95.
So April '95. I checked in on May of '94. So very soon after I checked on board, he did. And so if you do the math, right, that's 22 years. I'm 43 years old. I've known this gentleman half my life, and not just known him, but I've served with him, have gone through lots of things with him on a personal level. We've remained in touch even back before the days of Facebook and even before cell phones, man. I didn't get a cell phone until I was out of the Navy, right? We've seen a lot together, done a lot together, traveled together all over the world and done a lot of things. But I remember one of the first things that stuck out to me, and this will give you guys and gals a little bit of a retrospect. A long time ago in a faraway land, when you had music around, the only way that we could ever really listen to music was on CDs. And at least in the 90s when we were together, that was kind of the new thing. And it was always the thing to have like your 100 CD case. And I remember Chris had a 100 CD case, and I can vividly remember the first time I opened that CD case. And I went through all 20, because there was 4 to 8 on each page. Went through every page on that thing, and I was looking at every CD label and the artist and what it was about. And I got to the very end of that, and I went through his entire collection. And the only name that I even vaguely recognized in terms of an artist was Sean Lennon. And the only reason that I remember, and his brother Julian at the time was the one that everybody knew, and I only knew that it was Sean Lennon because he spelled his name like mine, and of course the last name. But if it wasn't for that, I'd never heard any of those guys' songs. And so it's kind of the precursor to this whole thing is that my friend is not only a true fan and a connoisseur, in that sense of music, but he's also very passionate about media. He's also very passionate about film and that expression in those areas. He was a journalist in the Navy, and he still does that as a passion. He still works in radio on the side outside of his job. Even within his job that he has now, he does a lot of things around film and things of that nature. So he loves movies and all kinds of things like that he's just really, really passionate about and really, really knowledgeable about. And so I thought that's the real reason to have him on this show, because it's going to give a little bit of a dichotomy, because there is an element today, and we may not recognize it as well as we have before, but if you look at history, I went back and did some research. Music has had a tendency to divide. Today we see this more, and it's almost like this moral war around music. So that is the reason we're going to have my friend Chris on the show today. So Chris, I thank you for taking the time, my friend, to come on here and talk.
No, thank you, Sean. I've been looking forward to it for a while. I know we've been talking about it forever, so it's good to finally hook up with you. I'm a little disappointed that I'm like 8th or 9th. out of your guess, but I won't hold it against you too much here.
I appreciate it. You're first in my heart for sure.
Attaboy.
So hey, so as everybody knows, when we get started, what we're doing now is we're going to go through a little bit of a bio that I'd asked Chris to fill out, and then we're going to go into some of the questions, and then we'll get started on the actual topic. And so to get to know Chris a little bit more, so the first question is, where were you born and where did you grow up? And he was born in Smithtown, New York. He grew up partly in Long Island, and then in high school he moved to upstate New York around Binghamton in that area, which is where he lives today. And then the other question is, where do you currently live and where have you lived before? As I said, he's in Binghamton, and he lived in Long Island and then also in San Diego, where we were in the Navy. And so his father was a principal. His mother was a bookkeeper, both whom I know, wonderful, the salt of the earth people. He's married to a wonderful woman, Nikki, who probably, who definitely deserves a little shout out. And she's just a wonderful woman. They have 3 kids. And now my friend, who I met when I was very young, is a grandfather. So just a moment to say congrats to you on that. It's wonderful to see that. And
thank you.
Yeah, Taylor's a wonderful mom, and it's so interesting, y'all, when you get to see, this is one of those moments when you get older and you always hear parents. It is something to watch a child who you've seen since they were very young. I mean, she was what, 4 maybe when in 95?
No,
6.
3, not even 3 when you met her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was there when his middle daughter Chelsea, who turns 21 in 2 days. I was there when she was born. So this is kind of a surreal thing, y'all. This is somebody who obviously, I've known, and so it's just an awesome thing to watch somebody grow up and then continue to just thrive and that kind of thing. And just glad to see, and of course Dylan, the youngest, is 15 and doing well as well. So that's a little bit about him. And then his humble brag, which I asked people to give 1 or 2 humble brags. He wrote that he's a human spell checker, and that if you spelled something wrong, he will find it. And that is you're not only good at spelling, but you were the first person that I remember when I this is way back saying, I said irregardless, and you were like, hey, don't say that. Like, that's not a word. And then we talked about this on another podcast I was on. Irregardless is now considered a word. Did you know that?
Did I know that?
Yeah, did you know that?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's...
It used to not be a word, and now it is.
I don't know. It just sounded like from the Department of Redundancy Department or something.
Yeah. But it was. But it didn't used to be, but now it is. So it's It just,
well, I mean, I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but I used to be a little bit more biting and sarcastic with that stuff.
Oh no, yeah,
and people when they were wrong or whatnot. It was more joking than anything else, but.
Well, yeah.
But the people who work for me, by the way, with the whole spelling thing, I think I drive them nuts because this is a stupid brag, but I could look at a piece of paper, a Word document or whatever, and it could be 250 words on a paper or something, and within a matter of less than 5 seconds, I'll go, that word spelled wrong, that word spelled wrong. It's almost like they jump out to me, like I'm Rain Man counting 246 toothpicks or something. It's horrible.
We all have that, we all have that little thing that makes us special, and you are like that. And what's funny is I know this, that if you're around him and if you say or do something like that incorrectly, I would almost guarantee you that he knows, and there's this fire inside of like, should I say something?
Yeah, and that's what I've gotten better at not doing it. I just kind of go,
is that really how you say that? Is that, so yes. And then the other humble brag that he gave, which is always one of these things, it's always good to know this kind of stuff, that he can reel off Super Bowl results from memory, including location and who the most valuable player was of that.
Probably every single one. I'm close to it. Yeah, it's
not bad.
Horrible. And then I can't remember to take out the garbage Thursday night. So
it's only so much room up there.
Right.
There's only, and you got to have, there's only so much space, as I've learned over the years. And I remember, and one of the things I'll brag about you a little bit. One of the things I can remember for a long time, and I said this on another episode. I used to watch Jeopardy, and I can remember I used to do pretty well on Jeopardy, I thought, and it could rattle off most answers. But I remember more than once watching it with you, and as I would think of the answer, you would be saying it, and it was just like, you're going to what, and as I'm saying what you're saying, is that, and I just remember that too. So yeah, that's my humble brag on my friend. So all right, so onward, and so out of the 3 questions, we narrowed it down. Instead of doing the 3, I'm going to ask you to choose a number 1, 2, or 3, and then whichever number you choose, I'm going to read the question and let you answer it.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to choose 1, 2, or 3. Yep. I'll choose 1.
1. What weird food combo do you really enjoy eating?
What weird food combo?
Anything stand out?
Wow, no, nothing stands out.
So
I've been making stuff all day too for tonight, but I can't think of what that would be. What weird food combo?
So I'll give you.
I did like. Okay, so I did like. Again, it's a famous weird food combo, but the Elvis peanut butter, banana, and bacon sandwiches.
Yeah.
Did you ever have one of those?
I have not. It sounds.
Okay, so there's a restaurant. I don't know if it's still open in New York City that we went to one time a few years ago, and they had them on the menu, and I got it, and it was more of a dare than anything else. I'm like, this is going to be disgusting. And ate it, and it was heavenly. It was
really?
It was so horrific for you. I'm sure it was like 1,500 calories this sandwich, but it was really good. So that's not a normal one. That's not an everyday thing. But
right, but it's something that you. Well, no, it's perfect.
It's something.
No, it's good. That'll work. The okay, so then the last two are the same. So the first one is what is your faith, belief, spiritual mantra? What would you say if I asked you what you do?
Just to give you a little background, when I grew up, we went to a Methodist church, and I was confirmed there and all that stuff when I was 13. It never really resonated with me. It was more, I spent my time sitting in the pew, either drawing pictures or, reading the stories in the Bible that I knew or something like that. I never really listened and all that sort of stuff. So it never really sunk its teeth into me. And my parents kind of got away from it then once I got into college and stuff like that. And I haven't really been part of a church per se for the most part since then. Not to say that I'm not a spiritual person. And I do, while I may not be your regular Christian and believe in the Bible and think that Jesus Christ died for my sins and all that sort of stuff, I do believe in a human spirit and kindness and empathy and passion and doing well for others and so on and so forth. And I think the thing that I identify more with than anything else when it comes to religion is Buddhism, quite frankly. It's something that I haven't studied, not a lot, but enough that when I read about Buddhism and see what it's about and understand the importance of meditation, and really that's for any religion, not just Buddhism. To me, that made more sense than any other religion, whether it be Catholicism or Judaism or Islam or whatever it may be. I just really identified that because it was really more about the self, yourself,
right,
and finding inner peace and just making sure you were taking care of yourself, both mentally and emotionally, and working on that, breathing and relaxing. And that to me made sense versus, if you accept Jesus Christ on your deathbed, all your sins will be forgiven. Not to say that people who believe that are wrong. Just to me, personally, it never made sense. I felt like there could be more to something when it came to a religion or a spirituality or something. So I see religion as a personal value system, no matter what it is, whether you're a Christian or, again, you're Jewish or whatever the religion may be. It's a personal value system. You're trying to better yourself and potentially as a result better your community or whatever it may be. Mine is, my own. I guess it's kind of a hybrid. I wouldn't really call it agnostic or atheist, but I certainly wouldn't call it Methodist or Lutheran or Baptist or anything like that. I just kind of live by basic principles that I think define what I feel are right and wrong, good and bad. Try to focus on myself and being the best person I can be. And as a result, you hope to make the people around you better without being preachy or showy or judgment. So yeah, that's where I come from.
And what I think is so interesting when you were telling me that, and we actually had a little bit of a conversation, obviously, before this. And when we talked about this particular subject, I know, as you guys have just heard, I've known Chris half my life. Him and I are what I would consider one of my closer friends, somebody who I've known for a long time and spent a lot of time with. Had a lot of conversations like this with about, and I did not know that he grew up Methodist. I mean, I knew that he wasn't. I knew you didn't grow up as a. When you said that to me the other day, we were talking about this. I remember in my back of my head going, I didn't know that. Now I knew that I knew you weren't a Christian per se. Church Sunday, that kind of like that was your first value proposition or your first faith statement. But I didn't know that you grew up in the Methodist. I would have lost that bet a million times. I didn't know that. So I think to me it felt like a little bit of an homage to what we're doing, and that sometimes even people that you've known your whole life, that have you really had a conversation with them about these things, and have you asked?
Yeah.
So the opportunity to get to know, and then how you said all those kind of things as well. I mean, I knew a lot of that, but those kind of things I didn't know. And so I think that's really important in that sense. And so the last question real quick is somewhat simple, and that is, when somebody says the word Christian and Christianity, what is your general impression? What is your first thought, kind of? And there are no right answers, you know that, right?
So, no, I understand. In general, I think that, and this is going to sound very vague and whatever, but I think if a person says I identify as a Christian, my first thought is, all right, well, that person wants to be a good person, right? I know that sounds simple and whatnot, but that's kind of the first thing I think of. The second thing, probably right after that, unfortunately, and this is again my own thing, is I always go, please, they're not going to try to convince me of something or start to preach to me, are they?
Right.
And so that's the part that always follows that up. And again, that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, where there's always that classic angel versus devil that are on opposite shoulders for me, whether it's correcting something that someone says wrong, or they say, I identify as a Christian. There's part of me that goes, that's good. All right, well, good for you. I mean, you're trying to be a good person, and it's, you better not, damn it, try to, convert me or do anything like that, because it's not going to work. You're wasting your breath. So,
Roger that. No,
yeah.
No.
I mean, that's. I know it's maybe not the best answer.
No, it is the best answer, and I think it's fair. And again, that seems to be something that resonates with what I keep trying to do, and that is part of it. I think we have to start being, regardless of what these answers are, or that's why it's not a right or wrong answer. And I think it's important for people to hear from a variety of people what their impression is, right or wrong, because that is your impression, and that we can't discount that. It's that individualism that is important.
Right.
And it's right because it's what you think. And so, all right, so into the subject and I thought this was really important as I started to really think about it and look at it from a faith standpoint. I started doing the typical Google stuff and looking around, and I remembered a few things from when I was younger, and I started imagining those old stories, especially back when we were younger, around Ozzy Osbourne. And I can remember being told that, because we had albums when we were young, which is something that you're very passionate about to this day.
Right.
Which is part of that awesome music sense that you have, but that if you played a Kiss record or an Ozzy Osbourne record backwards, that it would, the devil would talk, and because of the type of music, and there was messages back there that would brainwash you. And I can remember hearing that as a kid and kind of being like, well, that seems kind of weird, and why would that be for that? And I didn't really understand that division. And then you start to look at, and I remember I did some research, and you mentioned Elvis. And that he was at the very beginning of his career, had a lot of people coming out from a faith standpoint, Catholic Church type leadership aspect, coming out and talking about how much he was corrupting the minds of the youth, both men and women, and with the way that he sang and the way that he danced in his music. And if you go back and listen to it now, it seems very, very bland, relatively speaking, in terms of the content. And then here's a guy who identified as a Christian his entire life and sang some of the most beautiful hymnal music and gospel music that you can find even to this day. And yet there was this feeling about him. And then you start looking at a lot of music, especially, and even looking at television and looking at movies, and there seems to be this little bit of this culture war for, if in a sense, or there's this moral war between people that are willing to just kind of let morals go, is somewhat of the impression, whether it's music or television or anything like that, art in a sense. And then there's this conservative nature over here. And then, then I was looking at, I remembered a quote, and we talked about it a little bit before, but it stood out to me when I was years ago, that Bob Pittman, who was at the time the MTV president in the early 80s, had said something, and he was attributed to saying something along the lines of, at MTV, we don't shoot for 14-year-olds, we own them. And that was used as a rallying cry. This is to hear they're trying to own our kids. They're trying to possess them. They're trying to take them away from our moral center. They're trying to capture them in that sense. And I went back and looked at the research and looked at the quote. And what he actually said was the strongest appeal you can make is emotionally. If you can get their emotions going, that makes them forget their logic, and then you've got them. So he did. So I think so they kind of bastardized that quote. And so all that to say, and so part of the idea was, and then this is where, in my own personal experience at this time in my life, I would say however I have experienced, I remember years ago driving to work and listening to talk radio. And the minute I would get, and had to drive, it was 45 miles each way when I was working at Schlumberger years ago. And I was living in Clear Lake down here in Houston. And I can remember getting to the office first thing in the morning, and I was ready to fight, ready to go at it with somebody about some whatever. I can't even remember. I don't even remember if it was a conservative or a liberal talk show. I just remember I was ready to go at it with somebody. And then, then I had this moment like, why, why am I so emotionally charged about this? And then started looking at that. And I do believe on some level there's that garbage in, garbage outside. So that's kind of the crux of it. Talk a little bit about music, talk about art, media, film, all those dynamics. Does it matter? Should it matter? That's the idea, folks, we're going to talk about. And so when I say those kind of things, and so let me do this one last thing before Chris talks, because I want to set the table for him personally. I mentioned him about his music and stuff like that. But he does have such I think, a true appreciation for the art itself. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how you balance. What I'm really curious about, my friend, is how you balance between those two things. And do you separate? And do you think there's some authenticity to that idea of the content itself? And does it matter? Or is it just a perfect expression? And sometimes, is there a need to challenge the status quo? Is there a need can we use art in some way? Because we have, if you look at it historically, it has been a medium for change. It's been a medium to put messages out. I mean, look at Bob Dylan and people like that in the 70s and the 60s that came out and were expressing things especially during the Vietnam War and of that nature. And you can flip it to the other side from a patriotic standpoint. And you can push feelings and emotions and do just what Bob Pittman said. And so when are you doing that in a positive way, and when are you doing that in a negative way? And, is it the responsibility of the artist and those people, or is it the responsibility on the listener? What say you, my friend?
All right. So, what was the middle part again?
Hold on. Let me reread it. No,
that's a fish called Wanda joke. There's a lot to answer there. I'll just talk about it, and I'll get around to what you're saying as far as the importance. I just give you my perspective on it. I mean, as you alluded to earlier. Yeah, I have a fairly eclectic collection and taste in music. It wasn't something that I don't think you can do that and just like fake it and try it. I think it's just something that happened naturally.
No way.
Because I used to get accused years ago of, oh, you're just listening to that to be cool. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not really. I kind of enjoy this, and I wouldn't waste that much time and money just to try to be cool. It's just something I've always enjoyed, music in particular, and film especially as well. But I'd say more music, because you can incorporate it to more aspects of your life than you can movies. Movies is more of a commitment. Music you choose to have on at all times of the day. So it's always been a companion for me for quite a long time. When I was young, having music around, my dad was big into music. Had Beatles records at the house, and I knew about that from a young age, especially listening to Abbey Road and Here Comes the Sun and Me and Mr. Mustard and Maxwell's Silver Hammer and those songs, which was always, as a kid, or you're like, kids love Ringo Starr because he's the simpler one. So his music was easy to get. I love that stuff, but he's also had like old Steppenwolf records, and even Ravi Shankar, who played the sitar, was an Indian musician that the Beatles and others were big into, and hearing that and kind of going, whoa, this is different, but giving it a chance.
But but the different didn't scare you, right? The different didn't.
No. I liked it. I sometimes, admittedly, would force myself to listen to it. I would read a lot, so I would get influenced by music journalism. Rolling Stone was a huge part of my growing up. I had a subscription to that magazine from probably the age of 12 on, and would read it voraciously, cover to cover. And that influenced me, as much as anything. And then you have the personal influences. Like I said, I would say the music that we had in our house. I had some older cousins who were huge music fans that had a massive collection, more classic rock based. So all the Zeppelin, Who, all that stuff that are the staples of classic rock. Rush was a huge one, and they had a drum set. They would play Tom Sawyer from the Moving Pictures album, and we would be 10 years old, and we would try to emulate Neil Peart doing the drums on the Moving Pictures album, which is impossible to do even now. We were just that influenced my life, and looking at album art and seeing, like Houses of the Holy album by Led Zeppelin, and there's naked people on the cover, and it looks like they're sacrificing little kids, and going, what the hell? But being intrigued by it nevertheless, and it always, I always wanted more, and I wanted to find more and challenge myself. And I knew that there was always more out there. You always had your favorites, like I was a big Van Halen fan and a Genesis fan as a kid and all that. But then it's like, oh, well, I got to hear this, the solo album by Robert Plant or whatever it may be. So I always enjoyed at an early age challenging and finding new sounds that I hadn't heard before. When I moved when I was 15 from Long Island to upstate New York, that's a whole other story, but it was quite the change in culture and all that. I went from a suburban area to the very rural part of town. And so you're already kind of angry and just, I was kind of in the middle of teen angst at the time, and you identify with certain things, and you're, like you said with the MTV quote from, being that impressionable at that age. I certainly was, and it just happened to coincide with the beginnings of the rise of college rock and alternative radio, and REM in particular. And I still, to this day, remember hearing "It's the End of the World as We Know It," that song, for the first time, and that probably changed my life as much as any song, because it was so different from anything I'd ever heard before, and I was completely in love with it.
So on that side of it, because I'm curious now, as you're saying that, and this may not be a fair question, but kind of go through it a little bit if you don't mind. Is it the sound or is it the lyrics?
Oh, good question. For me, it has been probably 90% the sound and 10% the lyrics. And I know that's probably different than most people, but honestly, Sean, I could listen to a song that sounds great and the lyrics could be Chris Cappello's an asshole, and I'd still be like, man, that's a great song. Right. I just would. It doesn't really matter all that much to me what they say. If it means something, if it has meaning to what they say, it enhances it, of course. But, I love stuff that has no lyrics in it just as much as I love songs that do have lyrics in it. Something like a band like Mogwai, for example, which is a band that's still current right now. I mean, I love a lot of their stuff because it's just rock instrumentals, and it's fantastic. And I find it just as moving as anything that you could find that has lyrics in it, or Explosions in the Sky, for example, who did like all the Friday Night Lights movie music. I mean, that stuff is great. But yeah, it's been more about the sound. It's been more about the feeling that it gives me, more than the words. I have discussions with my sister-in-law about this all the time. And I'm horrible, by the way, notoriously horrible at knowing what lyrics are to popular songs. I mean, I get made fun of all the time because I'll be going, oh, I didn't know they said that, into, it could be a song that's been around 30 years. I'm like, oh, that's what they said? Yeah, I'm really bad with that. So that's how much they mean to me. However, for certain artists, you really get into the lyrics. You mentioned Bob Dylan earlier. I mean, he is a poet that happens to play music, and you listen to some of his stuff, and there's a lot going on there. I'm not the biggest Bob Dylan fan, but I certainly appreciate when someone can really write words that beautifully and put music to them. So when it comes to change, like you're talking about, though, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame.
Well, in that vein, so real quick, if you don't mind, in that vein, so I know your dad was a principal, and I know your dad, I say he's conservative, quote unquote. I don't mean politically. I just mean, I know he's probably a pretty, he's looking out. He's very kid-centric, and I'm sure he cares very much about the upbringing. Did he or your mom ever come to you and say, like, hey, you're listening to that Led Zeppelin, and that song's talking about XYZ, you shouldn't listen to it? No. I mean, they were strict at times, as well they should be. They were very liberal when it came to that stuff. So I was never told what I should and should not listen to. I mean, I was 19, 20 years old, and my room was covered with Public Enemy posters, and they would just kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, whatever. Right. Did you ever have anybody confront you about the lyrics of a song and be like, why are you listening to that, and why is that, that sounds terrible? Or do you recall any kind of conversation with somebody, maybe, I don't know? Yeah,
but it was more about like busting my balls than anything else. It was more like, this is horrible. I'm like, no, it's not. This is great. They're like, oh, this is brutal. How do you listen to this shit? And I'm just like, look, I just like it. What do you want me to say? It was more along those lines. I don't think anyone ever seriously came to me and said, what are you doing? Why are you listening to this? And to be fair,
there you go.
To use the McCoy vernacular, there wasn't a lot of stuff that I listened to that at least I think, that was abrasive and offensive in that regard. I should say offensive. Some of it might have been abrasive to certain people, but certainly not offensive. I mean, some of the rap, but we all listen to that. How can you not listen to the Chronic album? I mean, that was fantastic.
So and now, your dad and your granddad, and you do the shoe, then the shoe goes on the other foot, and you're now looking out. I mean, did you ever, does it change at all for you when you became a parent? Did you start wondering, should you listen, or should you even play music around the kids or things like that? Was it ever something you think, and what would you say to somebody who would say that? Cause I'm very conservative in that sense. Like my music taste, as you knew back in the day, was pretty much one style. I was a country music fan for most of my life, and I didn't mind listening to other stuff, but I was always a lyrically driven music fan, and that's.
Although I would like to believe I got to you a little bit. I did turn you on to some things that you did like.
Much like you said, I was kind of force fed until I found something that I remember. I remember what was like that. I think it was when I was leaving. I think I was leaving, and it was like we were getting together for like one of those last times. Like, we'll let you choose the music, and I think it lasted like 10 minutes, and you guys were like, "Okay, you got your 2 songs in, one George Strait song and one George Strait songs, and now we're out." I started playing.
Like that. Yeah.
I started playing. I'm
DJ.
Yeah. It's like I played "He Stopped Loving Her Today" by George Jones, and I think you and Rob and everybody were like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go jump off a cliff if you play any more of this stuff." So, what would you say to that? Because I mean, I do find myself very protective in that sense. Because I mean, I'm listening, and when my oldest is now 19, and even she starts singing some song, and I'm like, and I'll even ask her, I'm like, do you hear what that's saying? Do you know what that means?
Right.
And then, well, no, I'm just kind of and it's typically something, to your point, that sounds better, and I'm like, well, this is what it's saying. Is that really what you want to say? And I hate to be the stick in the mud, but there is that part of me so I don't know where that line is, and because I think you're a great example of somebody who can truly filter that, but across the board, that's where I start to get kind of like, man, I don't, not everybody has that.
Yeah. So I didn't change one thing at all about how I felt, once my kids started getting old enough to make their own decisions as far as music or what I may or may not have played. Nothing changed. I treated it exactly the same as I did when you and I and all the rest of the boys were around back in the late 90s. I didn't change a thing. It's one of those things I think my wife and we've certainly paid attention. We actively pay attention to what's going on in our kids' lives, but we gave them a long leash. Once they maybe took too much rope, then we jerk them back into place. But as long as we kind of, we're at arm's length and just kind of observed and said, okay, it looks like they're making good decisions. Might not agree with everything, but they're not doing anything bad. Then, whatever they did, they did. The other thing, though, was I make no bones about the fact that I wanted them to hear all sorts of stuff and be exposed to all sorts of stuff. The same way that I feel like with food, when we go out to eat and trying something different, or movies that we watch as a family. I like it. And again, maybe it's more me, but I think my kids have now that they've grown up in that, they appreciate it a lot more now. It's just, they've been exposed to things that most kids their age have not been exposed to. I didn't do that just so I could prove that I was, right, or I was trying to oversee them or anything like that. It was more about, I want you to experiment. I want you to challenge yourselves. I don't want you to I want you to think for yourselves. Don't feel like you have to just be normal like everyone else to quote unquote normal. That you live a little bit. You make your own decisions. And each of them, while they listen to some of the stuff that I've played for them over the years, they've all veered off into their own directions that I would not have anticipated. And I like that. And I think it's in large part because of how my wife and I have been pretty liberal when it comes to that. And just said, we'll expose you to stuff within reason. And we're not going to have sex and drugs and violence all over the place, but my son he's 100% hip hop, for example. That's all he listens to all day, every day. And while I just kind of shake my head at some of it, and I might I might object to some of the lyrics, I mean, quite frankly, that's that's what he likes and he enjoys. He gets passionate about it. So we have discussions about it too, and he understands where I'm coming from with it. But I never tell him he can't listen to anything, and I never told my daughters that either. They can, as long as they understand what it's about. I mean, just like you were talking about with your daughter. You have you know what that means when they're talking about that. But I'm not going to tell you, no, you can't listen to it. I'm not going to do that, because I know too that as soon as I do that, then they're going to want to listen to it more. I mean, I'm positive that would have been the case with me.
No, so and that is the struggle. I mean, that's definitely one of the struggles that I have, is because you're trying to protect in one sense, but I don't want to push them in the area I don't want them to go, and then it's not even about where I want them to go. But I do have a struggle with that, because it's, and then I look at it even and you look at the lyrics and you look at the way it's presented, and you look at and as I start to see it, it just starts to fall apart, and I feel like this is just garbage, and it's even meant, and it kind of goes a little bit back into that Bob Pittman thing, where I kind of feel like, are they taking advantage of a young impressionable person who doesn't know very well, and who doesn't know any better, and I think that's the real fear. Is in that it seems like that's the norm. Well, it's the norm to sit there and talk about how good looking a woman is, and I just talk about her, her tits and her ass, and it's and how much I want to sleep with her. I mean, because that's how guys feel when they're 15. And so, what's wrong with singing about it? And then I would argue, if that's always in your brain as you're a kid, does that 15, 16-year-old have enough ability up top to really make that decision without? And does that affect them enough to really have an impact on that decision either way? Is that really gonna put them over the top? And can you say 100% either way? No, but then again, as a parent, I struggle. Well, if it comes to that garbage in, garbage out thing, if I don't push that,
right,
then at least then I'm leaving it up to something and I didn't contribute to it. And then even in movies, I think are the same way. Because I mean, I know you're a huge movie fan. I know you're a huge TV fan and things like that. And then I look up on a regular TV night and think, like none of this is something I want to watch with my kids. Right, it's like America's Funniest Home Videos and Wipeout are like it, and everything else. Everything else is just it's either gratuitous violence or it's over sex stuff as I see it, and then, and I don't want to be a stick in the mud, and I don't want to be the guy who's that ultra conservative and like everything's bad. But again, I kind of go with it. If this is all you're watching and it's over and over and over again, and does it desensitize? Because that's a lot of the argument is now you've heard it so much that it doesn't really matter. That doesn't. Yeah,
and this is. You could go back 20 years and parents of the 90s are saying the same thing. And 20 years before that, the 70s, and parents are saying that. And back in the 50s, parents are saying the exact same thing. You talk about Elvis, here's the guy who's saying, "Love Me Tender," right?
Right. Yeah. Jailhouse Rock.
And, and people are getting completely offended. He went on, I think I have this story right. One of the first times he went on the Ed Sullivan Show. They only filmed him
from the waist up,
so people couldn't see his hips, because they thought that teenage girls, it would just be too much of a sexual overload for them. The stimulation would just drive them nuts, and they wouldn't be able to control themselves. I mean, it's always been that way. Now, it's not to say that, well, this is just how it goes, and so you just have to accept it, Sean, and your kids are just going to have to, whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just... I think putting into historical perspective that it's always going to be this way. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, there's going to be something that we don't know. We can't anticipate yet what it's going to be like. And you're going to look back at your kids now with your grandkids and going, man, I have no idea how they're going to try to limit and control this. But I think it just comes down to, on all of this, whether it comes to music, movies, television, social media, school interactions, all of that stuff. You have an open dialogue with your kids. Are they comfortable talking to you, and are you comfortable talking to them? And that's really, to me, the heart of it. Then you can talk about it, and then you can, that there's a built-in level of trust and honesty that you hope then that they make good decisions. You can't do everything for them, You just have to arm them with as much knowledge and information and love and kindness and trust and honesty to hope that when they do things like, I really like, Drake, or or I really like whomever it may be. You go, all right, okay, all right. You know what this is about, right? Yeah. But I like it. I love the sound. Okay, all right. And that's that. Or I like South Park, for example, and I know you and I are always big fans of those. And sometimes I see my son watching it, and I'm like, oh,
right.
I think the show's brilliant. It's a brilliantly written show. It's one of the smartest shows on TV. But yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, does he need to see that? I still am. But, again, and that's why I hope that he feels comfortable talking to me like my daughters did. And I know I'm comfortable enough to go, to have that discussion back and forth. It's for all of this stuff. Social media is another big one. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, so I won't even start that one. But
it's an extension, right? It's an extension of that.
Yeah.
And so because you said something earlier about Elvis, so what would you say to the argument or the statement? Because Elvis, like to now, would be kind of a joke in terms of being provocative, right?
Right.
And is that proof that over a period of time that we get so desensitized or so over the top that we have to have somebody like J-Lo literally dressing like literally naked, or Lady Gaga wearing meat, or doing something so outrageous to even get our attention anymore, because it has gone from that to this? Is that and then where does all that stop? At what point is it just where somebody's going to roll up and just have, something covering their nipples and that's it, and a little patch here and there, and that's going to be the dress or the way that people get our attention anymore in that regard? So that's where I wonder, because it seems to have progressed in that, to get people's attention or to have that shock value or anymore.
I think it always will. I think if you really think about it, it would be awkward if you just, turned around in 10 years and go, wow, I really haven't been shocked or in awe or surprised by anything that's happened in popular culture lately. I think that there's always going to be the pushing of the envelope. It's just how we respond to that and process that. And it's getting more difficult now. Again, I don't want to get into the whole social media thing, but there's such this amazing instant feedback that you can get now that it totally shifts the dynamic. And that's the part that I don't know about. And I think that could be, and is kind of proving out in the news every day, could be more and more dangerous, because you have access to feedback and to criticism that you just didn't have before, because now everyone's involved, or everyone can be involved. Whereas prior to, as little as 10 years ago, if you were an artist, for example, you were an artist and you could never get a hold of the person, and you never had some sort of access to contact them or communicate with them. Now anyone can communicate with anybody at any time about anything and start a movement and, put out information. And it's crazy now. It's really kind of nuts. And I think maybe that's where the shock value comes in. I'm just kind of thinking about this as I'm talking, but I don't think that shock, that where's the next line to cross, will ever stop. I just don't think we know what that is. We never do until it happens. Then you go, wow, I didn't see anyone ever wearing a dress made out of meat before, but okay, that's different.
And I like to do I like to find a challenging point or something that we can push out to the listeners, in a sense, to kind of look at this and draw some context from, and as an opportunity to reflect on some of what we're saying. And if I were to do that right now, I'd point a little bit towards the idea behind, instead of trying to find, because I find myself wanting to find that line of demarcation where we can't go past that, and this is where you want to take a stand and fight back. I do have that tendency in my mind.
Yeah.
But as you're saying that, I wonder if it's not a better use of time and effort that you, within the realm of people you can influence, and especially if you're a parent, or even if you have people that you influence in whatever regard that you do, and having a conversation do they understand what's going on? Do they understand? And are they equipped? And are you having that conversation first, which is obviously an homage to what we're doing now? and say, hey, do you understand what he means when he's saying that about women? Do you understand what she's talking about when she's talking about needles and the struggle? And I mean, I can remember years ago, there was a Godsmack song about voodoo, and my brother, who was like this huge, tatted up, metal fan or whatever.
Right.
And I remember a girl I was dating at the time told me, because, he's talking about heroin addiction. And my brother's like, what? Like, what are you talking? And, if you go back and listen, that's, as I remember it, that's what he was doing. And, oh, okay. It's more of that. That's what he's expressing. Do you understand why that struggle is there? Do you understand what he's really singing about?
Right.
And versus it just sounds cool. Because I can remember that song is one of those ones that, again, not my genre of music, but I remember that song sounded really cool. And you could get lost in the music and then all of a sudden not realize what it is that he's singing about. So I would take that as something for the listeners as you're going through this. If any of that resonates with you up top and makes sense with you in terms of your head, that maybe that's the real opportunity here, instead of just, because I think what happens, Chris, is that people find that opportunity to look back and go, well, Lady Gaga's just a terrible person and she's a hermaphrodite and she just doesn't care about society and morals, and she's obviously just she's chasing the star and the money and all the rest of stuff, or whatever reason you want to come up to find this division, versus trying to find an opportunity to say, okay, well, my daughter's listening to this. Do you understand what she's doing? Do you understand what she's singing about? Do you understand why? Because there is an opportunity for music to do wonderful things in terms of.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because overwhelmingly music provides something that's just so unique to the world, no matter what culture you're in. And, take away the fact that, yes, times can it provoke? Can it raise controversy? Can it lead to social change and protest? Yes, of course. But overwhelmingly, I would say the vast majority, maybe not all, but the vast majority of artists are genuinely, they are doing it because they love music and have something that they want to say and something that they want to express. And that's where, while yes, it's always been commercialized and, and produced and sanitized and everyone's looking into it. I think in this day, especially now with the way that music has changed from a distribution standpoint, where, now you can basically have your music in through multiple mediums and have it be accessible to people. So you're now living in it, but again, garbage in, garbage out. You could have a lot more crap too. But point being that people are doing this because they want to be creative. They have a passion for something and they have an artistic vision and they're trying to get that across. And if people listen to it and identify with it, then that's great. And most of the time it's not trying to cause a movement or start a movement. It's not trying, it's not protesting anything. It's more personal or more observational. And again, I'm making really vast generalizations, but I think you get my point, is that it's the creativity aspect of it and that's, whether, again, no matter what the medium is, whether music, whether it's movies, whether it's writing, creativity and being creative as a person, to me, is such an important part of just life, in expressing yourself, in leaving a legacy for yourself, doing something that moves people, that moves you first, but then hopefully moves other people. What you're doing is a creative outlet right now. Yes, you're trying to inform people and bring people to the table and so on and so forth, but you're expressing your creativity with how you want to. You're just expressing your creativity, right? I mean, this is a way for you to be creative. That's what musicians are trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do when I make a little family film or something. I love the process. I love working on something for hours and hours and hours and then showing people and they're moved by it. And you're just like, yes, it's an incredible feeling. And you see what I'm talking about now. Mm-hmm. I think if everyone found that within themselves, whether it be woodworking or whether it be crocheting or whether it be drawing or writing a computer whatever it may be, if you're creating and not just working, and going to your 9-to-5 job or going to school or whatever, but something that you're incredibly passionate about, that you would do for free and that you just do because you just love doing it. Yeah, I think it's so vital to just daily life that's what these musicians are doing. They're getting paid for it though, which I guess then they're sellouts, right?
Well, it's such a paradox in that world, because you see a lot of the independent artists that are from a talent level, and I've seen this now as I've gotten older, have from a pure talent standpoint, seem to have more talent from whether it's in singing or instrument playing than a lot of the superficial artists that you look up and see that they're just either pretty or have just an outstanding voice, or they're packaged in some sort of way to create some. And there's that high level corporate side. Along those lines, I wanted to ask, and I think that's all true. But what do you do about, there is some out there that can control and can start to go down the road of influencing from a thought process and even influencing in a negative side. And that may be too vague or generalized in terms of what I'm talking about, but I do think there's not opportunities. There's mediums out there. It could be on YouTube channels. I mean, that's where we see, I don't even know if I want to bring this up. Let's just say you have a certain political bent or a certain message you want to get across. You can use music and video and media to convey that message, regardless whether it's accurate or not, and start to convince people of certain things in terms of even from a historical standpoint or from a current culture standpoint or what people are really like or what people are about. And so, because I don't want to name any specific names or genres, so then all of a sudden we're, talking about this particular political subject or whatnot. But there is that element to that. What do you do? Do you find yourself listening to something? Have you ever listened to something and gone, okay, that's not really music. They're kind of trying to whittle their way into this side of it. So does that ever come up? And do you have any filters on that? Or have you ever heard something and just right away knew that it was almost had that kind of that repulsive aspect to it? And then what did you do about it?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking, but I'll say this. If I don't like it, there's a really easy way that I alleviate that. I don't listen to it. I don't listen to it. And I don't care about hurting anyone's feelings or trying to make a point about it. It's that way with all of this stuff, which always baffles me to a certain extent when you hear people like, oh, this is horrible. This should be banned. This should be off the air, or this should never play on the radio or whatever. And, I hate this. This is horrible. Okay, well then don't listen to it.
Okay, so maybe this is a better way to do this. And again, I don't know. We're on the fly here a little bit. So if you had a friend of yours, say one of our guys, say I was listening to something and it was really politically charged a certain way.
Yeah.
And the music I was listening to, if you were, like back, especially when we were back in the day when we were around each other all the time, and you kept hearing, but you started to hear that it was beyond music.
Yeah.
and it was having an influence on the way that I thought, and it wasn't just from because what you said before was beautiful, and I agree with you. I would argue on some level there's stuff out there that's meant to be that, but there also is something else that they're trying to do, promote a certain ideology. And so when they do that, and you see people kind of, and you're like, wait a minute, what do you see them, and you're just regurgitating what comes in your head, and you're kind of like, you're almost kind of becoming just a sounding board for this. And there's a friend of mine I'm thinking about, obviously not gonna say their name, but because I'll hear them say stuff, and I can almost hear them verbatim saying something that they just heard on the radio from like a show, and I kind of want to grab them and say, are you thinking that, or are you just regurgitating what you just heard? Because it's just kind of, you're becoming a sounding board for it. What do we do about that per se?
Well, I don't think it's the music's problem, first of all. I don't. I think that's a personal problem. I mean, you could have that with it. Music just happens to be the particular medium that you're talking about here. I think that's an issue with how a person processes information then, and not being able to maybe fully think for themselves and be independent. And there's certainly, again, a lot of that going on now that you get influenced so easily by you're using with music that it could be politically charged. It's everything right now.
Right.
And I think, yes, there is a music in this particular case from the example you're using is certainly the vehicle, but it's not what's propelling the vehicle, in my opinion. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but I think it's more, if you find the right person, they'll believe anything you tell them. Me, and I know you, myself, and I know you're going to go, I call bullshit. I don't buy that. And it goes back to dialogue and talking through it. So if I saw you or someone else that may be influenced by something like that, again, whether it be through music or something else, I would just start asking questions, and without trying to be offensive, and just, where are you coming from here? I'm not sure where you're coming from. Why do you feel this way? And you're probably not going to change the person, but at least you get them thinking, like, don't be so easily influenced. I guess really where my head's going with that is, you still have to think for yourself at the end of the day. You still have to process that information and go, does this make sense? Or are they just trying to sell me something, or do they have an agenda of some sort? Because you're right. There is that. There certainly can be that in certain circumstances. And again, I'm not going to name names or pick sides either with this, but yes, there certainly is. I think you have to be an independent thinker to sift through some of that, and it's not always easy.
And it's not, and I think that's why some of this becomes so difficult to manage, and I think to get through in terms of what you should and shouldn't do. Because it seems, I remember back when we used to visit places like the UAE and in the Middle East, and we would see the ladies wearing the burqas long before it was mainstream, before people even knew. I remember thinking, on some level, right, the draconian measure of just covering a woman from head to toe so that you never had to look at her would, in a sense, solve the problem of ever having to worry about your eye wandering in that regard, because you're never going to see it, right? You're never going to see the things that trigger that. But I felt it was a little like that. I knew that was too much. I was like, that seems very, very dramatic one way.
Yeah.
I could see where it might work, where if I never looked at it, I would never be tempted by it. But you're now trying to, in a sense, oppressing just the very physical being of a gender, and that's way too far to that side. And so that if you never had, if you never listened, because there was an article I read that when I was preparing for this, and it was written from a faith standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, and the argument was, well, hey, look, if you just, you should just listen to only music that talks about Jesus, and you should only listen to music that has those kind of things, and that's it. And just anything else is secular and probably not a good idea. And I had a real and this is recently, preparing for this, and I had a bit of a old school reaction, kind of the same one you had when you mentioned earlier about that whole thing about dying at your deathbed and all of a sudden giving yourself to Christ and everything you did is forgiven. Before I became a Christian, that was I used to have that, and I used to make that argument. We probably had that discussion more than once. I never liked that whole idea. Going through all of that, it's just such a difficult subject to really kind of get around and.
We're talking, this thing started with music, but it's certainly evolved into it much more than that, which is expected, right? I mean, it's more than just about music. It's about
frame of mind.
Yeah, it's about, and I don't know. I just always, again, it's like, well, no, that's not how I interpret it. Me personally, I just like this music. I mean, What do you want me to say? So I just enjoy it.
So I got.
Can I just like it without having to have some other agenda associated with it that I'm supposed to feel bad now because I like this? I just like the music.
Right. No, I definitely appreciate it. And so I got kind of my thought back, and I'd mentioned about the secular idea of you just listen to Christian music, you'll be fine. And I had a reaction to it. So and you're talking to somebody who now, over the last, after I became a Christian, this is 12 years now, I remember doing a 30-day challenge for the local KSBJ radio station, and having that moment that you had mentioned before about having a lot of weird reactions to it. I mean, when we sing in church, when I first 2 years of me going to church, I didn't know any song that they ever sang unless it was Amazing Grace. I didn't have a clue, and it was odd, and it was weird, and it was hard to get through. Now, today, I mean, literally, and this is why that article kind of upset me a little bit. I mean, all I listen to is Christian music, so I get, and that's because that's what I love every part of it, and that's what I want to listen to, and that's fine. But the idea that you can only listen to Christian music, or that you only should listen to music, and it has to mention Jesus every time that you're singing, or every time a song comes on, that's all you can ever listen to, and I'm a Christian, and I don't buy that. I don't buy that. I understand the intent, which kind of goes back to the burqa. I think if I'm going to help explain that a little bit more, is that I understand the intent is, well, if all you ever talked about was doing something that was good, and you just had the same song in your head, hey, just be a good person, and you turned into a little bit of a drone. But the idea that there's no other music out today unless it involves the name, and I've even heard podcasts. There was one recently with a Christian singer called Plum. She was talking about her journey and how she had some music that she was playing that she just wanted to express as an artist, which is what you said earlier, and how she got pushed back from the industry because it didn't mention Jesus specifically. There's people like her. There's groups like Switchfoot that people keep asking, like, Switchfoot, are you a Christian band or are you not? And they're kind of like, we're just Switchfoot. They're like, we're not trying to go either way. And there's a real popular group right now called Hillsong United that's part of the Hillsong Church out of Australia. And they talked about on that same podcast. It's called the More Than Music podcast with Justin Paul, or Paul. Let me get that wrong, but it's called the More Than Music podcast. It's great. It's one of those podcasts, if you want to listen to somebody, if you like that kind of music, they have all the guests on there. If you're a big Christian music fan, I suggest you listen to it. I love it. And they said that in Australia, they don't actually divide up on normal radio. You turn it on, you could hear their music, and you could hear AC/DC, then you could hear Adele, then you could hear whatever. They don't actually divide it. And here in the States, it's like, oh, here's a Christian rock, or here's a classic rock, and we're only going to play classic rock. And here's this one over here, which is country music, and it's only country music.
And it drives me nuts.
And they don't do that, and I never even knew that. I was like, I thought that's what people did, and as much as I've traveled the world, I don't think I've ever listened to the radio per se in other places, and so I didn't even know that was even something people did. But the idea that you can't just express it from a musical standpoint, or that unless it talks about Jesus, it's not good music. And this may get me in trouble with my Christian brothers and sisters, and if so, I'm perfectly willing to have that. But to tell me that there's no other music that you should ever listen to.
I think it's safe to say I don't agree with that either. Right. I mean, you know that. It doesn't have to be. It's a personal thing. The music is a very personal experience. I believe. Now you can share it with other people, but it's still what you like is what you like. You can't hide that. You can't force something. I don't think it's something you could just say, well, thou shalt only do. Only listen to music that mentions Jesus Christ in it. Yeah, now you're telling me what to do. I don't really like that. If something touches you, right, and I don't mean physically touches you, but touches you emotionally, that you listen to, that may be from a genre that you would never guess, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. You'll be fine. You're gonna live. You're not going to hell. You're not gonna change your sexuality or anything like that if you like Pet Shop Boys, right? I know it's a horrible joke, but you know what I mean? Like nothing's gonna happen because you liked what was the name of the Christian rock band one of them that you were talking about?
Like Hillsong United or 10th Avenue North.
I mean, I may hear a song from them and go, wow, that sounds really good.
Switchfoot.
Okay,
I would. I'd recommend Switchfoot. They're definitely one that
sounds really good. I might not really doesn't mean much what they're saying to me, but it sounds good. And great, listen to it. There's nothing wrong with that. And then you may turn around and say, I love, Kendrick Lamar, one of probably the most respected hip hop artists out there right now. And yes, I still listen to hip hop from time to time. I'm 45 years old, but it still moves me. I still hear things in it that I haven't heard before. He's one of them in particular, where you want to talk about lyrics. That guy is a poet and talks about the struggle and the struggle within himself that he deals with on a day-to-day basis, being from Compton, but being brilliantly talking about these issues. Well, if you like it, you like it. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Well, I don't know. I was never into genres. I mean, I get genres, and there are certain days where, like, all right, I just want to listen to rock, and I just want to listen to, alternative, or I just want to listen to whatever. But I could play anything, anytime, anywhere. That's just me. So.
No, understood. And I had a thought, though, because I remember when I was younger, I remember Two Live Crew when I was in high school, and it was As Nasty As They Want to Be, and I remember that. So not to completely contradict all that, but I do remember I went back years ago and started to listen to some of those songs, and, not something I would have recommended to my 15-year-old self from a 16-year-old.
No. I mean, they're I know. And they're fun at the time, and you're like, oh, and it was, you'd play it, and you're like, listen to this. This is so ridiculous. And that's basically what it was at the time, at least for me. Again, I'm not trying to discount the artistry of, Luther Campbell. However, with a little time, a little perspective, you look back, and you just kind of go, all right, well, that was,
But I remember the Ghetto Boys.
1990.
You probably remember Ghetto. I remember the Ghetto Boys, and it was, it was no less, I guess, hard or kind of those, but their lyrics are much more about a struggle that as I remember listening to it than it was just being profane, and I think that's kind of where I was getting to a little bit earlier about.
I agree with you there.
Shock just a shock because you just want to be a Yahoo and get up there and talk about this stuff, and then you have some 15-year-old kid, 30 years ago who's like, yeah, man, this is awesome, because I don't know any better. And then later on, you kind of go, oh, that's why they were protesting. That's actually awful.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. There is definitely a difference between shocking just for the sake of shocking versus shocking because this is stuff that maybe you have never heard before and you should be hearing.
Right.
When NWA came out, or Public Enemy that I mentioned before. Let's be brutally honest here. White America heard this stuff and was like, whoa.
Right.
I mean, they're talking about fuck the police. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
But how, in a sense, I'm not saying it's right, but how ahead of their time were they? So it's
very,
you look back at recent events, and I mean, hell, they were talking about this in 1987, 1988.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying that they were right or anything like that. They're observing what's going on in their neighborhood. They're observing what's going on in their everyday lives, and that's how they felt and expressing themselves.
Well, I remember,
which is also one of their songs, "Express Yourself."
Right. Yeah. That was was that NWA or was that?
Yeah,
it was NWA. Yeah. But I remember the Ghetto Boys had a cover of their album, and Bushwick Bill was on it, and he was in the while they were in the hospital, he'd been shot in the eye by his girlfriend, if I remember, because a friend of mine's, my buddy Clayton Hoyle. So Clayton, if you ever hear this, I think it was his aunt or his mom was a nurse at the and they actually took that picture while they were there. And
really?
If I remember, that was the story. And this, I'd be curious if anybody hears this and wants to clarify either way. But to your point, it was more that they weren't doing that to shock, just to put a weird picture of a guy who'd been shot on a picture of an album.
Right.
They were
trying. This is my life. This is my life.
This is what we're going through, and this is those kind of things. And that's why I think that kind of music tends to stick around a little bit longer than stuff that's just meant to shock for the sake of it. And then for whatever reason, how this is a segue, I don't know. But I remember not too long ago, I got a little bit disappointed with Madonna. There was something they were showing. She was at some place somewhere she was singing, and they wanted her to sing like a virgin, and she acted like she didn't know the words, and she kind of was like, I don't even remember this song, and I'm thinking, no, hold on, you sang that song years ago for the intent to get people's attention, knowing you were not, and you definitely weren't dressing like one, and you weren't acting like one, and you did that to get our attention, and then now you're going to act like you don't remember the song, which is. Everybody. I mean, most people I know can sing that song, right? And I thought it was a little bit of a.
Never heard
it. I just thought it was a little bit of a. It just that didn't resonate with me in terms. I was like, I kind of felt like she was being misrepresenting who she was. It's like that's you used to be. You were that. That's who you are. That's part of your. And she's gone on to do amazing songs and music, and has been a presence, and that's why I thought was such a little bit of a disservice to who she was. It's like don't. If this would, and because I think that it goes back to that independent thing, that there's all these artists are struggling to even get their music heard. So now I have to go shock. I have to do a sex tape to get anybody's attention, or I have to go on YouTube and jump off, do the jackass thing, in my version. And now there seems, and I think you were alluding to that earlier about getting people's attention that way. And that's kind of where I guess I start to worry about people getting people's attention just for the sake of it, and not being true to the music and not true to who they are and the message.
Yeah, it's the Kardashian effect,
right?
In a sense, right?
But I think so. We're here at about an hour 15, so it's a good place to wrap up. So I think I'll say one last thing and then let you kind of close us out a little bit. I hope what people heard is it again not a definitive answer either way. That it is something I think goes throughout. I think there's an opportunity there. It's a tool like anything else. It can be used one way or the other. But more than anything, is an opportunity to talk to somebody, especially if you're in a world of influence around somebody. Especially a younger person, I would say, or even somebody that on a personal level that may be going through that time. As we change, our music, our tastes change, our feelings change. That just have a discussion about it and talk about these things. If something's influencing somebody or something influenced you, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about music. You can talk about how that song, or if you're like Chris, you just like the way it sounds. It doesn't have to be that big of a deal. I don't think there's a definitive answer either way in that regard, but I do think it's important to at least talk about it. And so that's why I thought this was important to talk about music, important to talk about how that influences what people do, how people subtract from that situation. And so, well, brother, Amanda, we'll do this again. Maybe we'll do it around television or movies, but I appreciate your time.
No, I appreciate you giving it to me, or giving me your time or the chance to talk about this. I mean, how passionate I've been over the years with this stuff. I do want to say to the people that are listening and maybe haven't gotten out of their comfort zone is, what, it's okay to, I mean, ask Sean. I made him get out of his comfort zone years ago. And while he might've been uncomfortable at times, I think it opened his eyes up to things that he wasn't aware of. I still, I mean, again, I'm 45. I still listen to current music as much as possible. I'm not one of those people that I only listen to classic rock, and anything that was made after 1987, after the Whitesnake album came out, is just, trash to me. I'm not like that. I mean, we don't have people that watch movies that stopped watching movies after Back to the Future came out, right? No, you're still watching current movies. I do the same thing with music. I still like the coolest thing for me is still eternal journey, that eternal quest or challenge, that I hear something that either A, moves me, like it makes me go, oh, I'm not going to skip yet, I want to hear the rest of this. Or two, like it just totally blows me away, which is always great. And I still get that from time to time with new music or going back and listening to old stuff that I'd never heard before. So I spend a lot of time actively listening to music. It's not just on in the background. I go searching for it. And I love it. And I encourage people to do that, because I think there's so much out there still that I haven't listened to. I'm sure there's stuff out there that you who are listening haven't listened to. It's a personal thing. It's a way to express yourself. It's a way to feel good about yourself or challenge yourself. And I guess that's about all I have to say about that. But one other thing too, I do want to say, I think that, what you're doing with this podcast is a fantastic thing. I really enjoyed the opportunity to come on here and talk, and hopefully we get to do it again at some point. You were born for this. I've known you for a long time. I know that you've been passionate about people just finding their inner selves, and you may have found another aspect of it with this, and I couldn't be prouder of you, and I love you, my brother.
Thank you, my friend. So I really appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So get back to center a little bit. So you.
Oh, sorry.
No, I do, because I appreciate that, man. It means a lot to hear that.
Yeah.
So, but I was going to suggest, would you be willing, because I mean, to put it out there in the world, I think you could actually see what Chris is actually talking about. If you wanted to give your Instagram account out, I think you could, if you were willing to do, if you wanted to put that out to the world, that'd be a good way to go back. And because I'm telling you, even to this day, Chris will do this. He'll, not to make it, you can decide either way, but I just know he does this all the time. We do this text group that still a bunch of us are a part of, and he'll send us this picture of some random out, and it is so far out of and so I want to prove that in a way, but I don't, and maybe we'll just put one up on if you don't want to put your Instagram out. But if I think
I don't care.
So if you want to put tell him what your Instagram is, you can go and look and see all this stuff he puts out all the time.
Yeah, so it's at Square Seed, or for Twitter, and also for Instagram, it's just Square Seed, one word, and it's a name that came from a math teacher in high school who used to call me C squared, and I just changed it to Square Seed just to be a goofball. But it's just something I've used as a online handle for certain things, whether it be blogging or just writing, or Twitter, Instagram. I don't do much of it. You know me, I'm more of a goofball with this stuff, but I do like my Saturday morning album covers. And yeah, if you're interested too, I can give you, if you want to know, I don't know if anyone does, for the 5 or 6 people out there who might go, hey, what the hell does he actually listen to? I'm a huge list guy, so I always do my best music I heard from the year. And so 2017, what I heard that was made in that year. So it's not just, I loved Stairway to Heaven and listened to it a lot. No, it's not that. It's music that was actually made and released, or at least released in 2017. And I just did a list that I sent out to some friends last week. And I could make it public. I don't mind sharing that to you, with you too.
Well, I definitely think Instagram.
Do it through your website.
Yeah, we can do that for sure. Because it's like, if that appeals to you at all, I mean, or if you just want to kind of challenge. And to his point, I can remember there was that song, and it keeps going on every time you said that. There's that, it was some sort of instrumental, and it was this weird.
Money Mark. Yeah, Money Mark, the keyboardist for the Beastie Boys. Yeah.
And it was so stuff like that you would pull out, and I would just sit there going, "What in God's name is that?" And it is. Yeah. And here's the thing: I haven't heard that song since then, and it's not something that. But I remember it, and I do think it does. It does do something to that plasticity, neuroplasticity, if I can call on that, in terms of expanding a little bit. That there are people, and I think what I saw the most in you was I never became a fan, but I was always appreciative of the fact that you were. And so I thought, okay, that's okay. It is that there is something for everybody, kind of thing, and I think that that's important. And allowing for that, it didn't mean that I became a huge fan or that I had to be your friend, but it was I think you showed me a lot, and that you showed me that ability to kind of be yourself more. And I needed that when I was younger, definitely from a confidence standpoint. So I'll say that you were always that kind of role model for me, and somebody who was as comfortable in their own skin. And if you are comfortable, I think because I don't want to turn this into a love fest, but where the real beauty of that entire situation was that you were so comfortable in yourself that it really didn't matter what other people thought, and so that even if people brought stuff to you that you didn't let it get to you. And I think we could do a little bit more of that. Not that we need to become self-righteous or anything like that, but definitely become comfortable. And this is what I like, and so I'm going to listen to it, and be okay if that's not what everybody else listens to, and that kind of thing. So I think we touched on it, man. This was great.
Thank you, man.
No problem. So as always, if you're okay, I'm gonna close out with a prayer, and then we'll sign off.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this opportunity. I come to the table as you've laid out and as you provided this wonderful medium, as Chris mentioned. We could never have without your hand, as I see it, and we're just so grateful for this opportunity. I thank you for Chris's time. I think for the time of the listeners that are here. I hope that this resonates with them. I hope that it speaks to them. I hope this allows them a chance to hit the pause button and take a step back and listen to the other side, whether it be music, whether it be somebody else's impression of things, all of those things. Let this be an opportunity for people to come together. And music is such a wonderful way to do that. It's one of the best and most beautiful ways to do that. And that there is garbage out there at the same time. And that may be a little judgmental, but there is. And so giving people the opportunity and the strength and the foresight to weed through that, and to not try to protect so much that you're bigger than that, and that the right message will get through eventually, and just have confidence in that, and let us come together more than stay apart. Thank you for just our health. Thank you for this wonderful friendship I have with my friend. I'm so very grateful, and just this time and this opportunity. It's your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, brother. Well, hey, so typical sign-off stuff. I'm not a huge fan of this stuff, but hey, look, we'd love to hear you, hear your review, hear your feedback. The Come to the Table podcast at gmail.com. Reviews, subscribe, all that good stuff. We want to hear from you. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Let us have it. Let me know. Let me know what you think. I don't know unless you tell me. And if there's something you want to challenge around this, I'd love to have a discussion about it. Go out and have your own, and we're off, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
All right, brother. All right, thanks.
Take
God
care.
Bless. Yep.
Thank you so much for listening to the Come to the Table podcast. As always, we hope our conversations inspire you to invite someone you know and love to the table to have an open, loving, and respectful discussion, maybe even a difficult one. If that happens, we'd be honored if you would contact us about it so we could share it. Thanks again.
And God bless everyone.